Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we are cracking open what is literally the ultimate historical and theological cold case, history's most infamous traitor, Judas Iscariot. We're going to peel back the layers of 2,000 years of history, theology, and myth-making to uncover exactly how the story of just one man became such a massive cornerstone of Western culture.
Picture this, a spring evening in Jerusalem, right around 30 AD. A modest sum of 30 pieces of silver changes hands. According to the foundational texts of Christianity, this single, seemingly small transaction became the most famous blood money in human history. It set the stage for an unparalleled betrayal that would ultimately lead to the crucifixion of Jesus of Nazareth.
Here is our roadmap for the explainer. First, the infamous betrayal. Second, contradictions in the Gospels. Third, constructing the ultimate villain. Fourth, the Gnostic Gospel revelation. And finally, reassessing the traitor.
Section 1. The infamous betrayal. Let's look at the baseline narrative.
You know, the mystery actually starts with his very name. Judas was incredibly common in the first century. It comes from Judah, the founder of one of the 12 tribes. But the surname Iscariot, that sets him completely apart, and scholars are actually still debating what it means today. There are three main theories. First, it could mean he was from Kirioth, a town south of Jerusalem. If that's true, he'd be the only Judean outsider hanging out with a group of Galilean disciples. Alternatively, it might just come from Curia, which simply means town. But the third theory? This one is fascinating. It might be a corruption of the Latin word Sicarius, which literally means dagger wielder or assassin. That would imply he had ties to the Sicaria, a Jewish revolutionary group known for taking out Roman collaborators. So right out of the gate, his identity is a total puzzle.
Moving to Section 2. Contradictions in the Gospels. Let's look at the cracks in the narrative.
When you actually sit down and read the earliest Christian texts, that unified Sunday school story we all know begins to show some really fascinating cracks. Looking at the timeline of the first century, the earliest works of Christian literature aren't even the Gospels. They are the letters of the Apostle Paul, written around 50 AD. And get this, Paul doesn't mention a malicious betrayal at all. He simply uses a Greek word that translates to Jesus being handed over. It suggests more of a divine initiative than a sinister backdoor plot. It's not until the Gospel of Mark, roughly 20 years later, that Judas is officially labeled a betrayer. But even then, Mark gives absolutely no motive whatsoever. None. Fast forward a few more decades to Matthew and Luke, and suddenly we start seeing motives like greed and demonic possession appear. By the time we reach the Gospel of John, written after 100 AD, Judas is fully cast as a thief and a devil from day one.
This evolution is wild when you compare the accounts side by side. Take his motive. We go from literally no motive in Mark to the famous 30 pieces of silver in Matthew, escalating all the way to actual possession by Satan in Luke and John. Now consider the kiss, the ultimate symbol of treachery, right? Well, in Mark and Matthew, Judas kisses Jesus. In Luke, Jesus basically takes evasive action to dodge it. But in John, there is no kiss at all. Judas simply stands there with a detachment of Roman soldiers. And regarding his fate, Matthew is the only one who gives Judas a moment of genuine remorse, mentioning that he tried to return the money before tragically hanging himself. It's pretty clear that as the decades passed, the texts piled on the sinister details while actively stripping away any mitigating human factors.
Section 3. Constructing the ultimate villain. This is where the medieval myth-making takes over.
As we head into the Middle Ages, the church began to explicitly demonize Judas far beyond those original biblical texts. Keep in mind, this was a largely illiterate age. They needed visceral, terrifying imagery to communicate messages and maintain authority. So, the myth-making went into overdrive. The book of Acts already had a gruesome verse claiming Judas's body swelled up and his intestines spilled out, but medieval writers added their own horrors. The 6th century Arabic infancy gospel actually concocted a story where a demon-possessed child Judas tries to physically bite the boy Jesus. In literature, Dante's famous Divine Comedy drops Judas into the very lowest, icy pit of the 9th circle of hell, where he's eternally chewed on by a three-headed Satan. And if you looked at Renaissance art, sculptors literally placed a horned, dragon-tailed Satan sitting directly behind Judas at the Last Supper. He was deliberately engineered to be a figure completely and utterly beyond redemption.
And if you thought that was dark, wait until you hear about the 13th century Golden Legend. This was one of the most widely read books of the Middle Ages, and it gave him an absolutely unhinged Oedipus-like mythology. Check out this backstory. He's abandoned at sea in a wicker basket, washes up, gets adopted by a queen, grows up, and murders his adopted brother. Then he flees to Jerusalem, murders a landowner who, plot twist, turns out to be his biological father, and then unknowingly marries the widow, who is his biological mother. They essentially wrapped him in the darkest historical fan fiction imaginable to cement his total depravity. The text even claims that when he died, his demonic spirit had to exit through his rear passage, simply because the mouth that had kissed Jesus was considered too sacred. You literally can't make this stuff up.
But here's the thing. This wasn't just bizarre medieval folklore. It had devastating real-world consequences. Theologically, Judas was used as a necessary symbol of avarice, the ultimate cautionary tale against loving money and betraying God. Historically, however, it's a much darker story. Because the name Judas shares etymological roots with the word for Jew, this theological construct was tragically weaponized. It fueled centuries of the horrific, greedy Jew anti-Semitic trope across Europe. We see this play out explicitly in late 19th century France during the Dreyfus Affair. A Jewish military captain was falsely accused of treason, and the press actively branded him Judas Dreyfus. Decades later, Nazi propaganda films, like 1940's Jew Sus, explicitly used the artistic traits assigned to Judas over centuries to vilify the entire Jewish people. The myth of Judas directly fueled some of the absolute darkest chapters in human history.
Section 4. The Gnostic Gospel Revelation. Time to flip the script.
Just when you'd think the narrative was entirely settled by 2,000 years of tradition, an incredible discovery completely flipped the script. A deteriorating papyrus text was rediscovered in Egypt, and when it was finally translated into English in 2006, it sent shockwaves through the historical community. This was the lost Gospel of Judas. It's an apocryphal text associated with the Gnostics, which was a sect that prioritized inner, hidden spiritual knowledge. It was originally written way back in the 2nd century AD, and we actually know it was denounced as heresy by a church bishop in 180 AD. After that, it was lost to time for nearly 2 millennia.
And why was it denounced? Because in the Gospel of Judas, he is not a villain at all. In fact, he is presented as the most favored apostle. He's the only one who truly understands Jesus' divine mission. Listen to this staggering quote directly from the text. Jesus tells him, "You will be the 13th, and you will be cursed by the other generations, but eventually you will rule over them." In this alternative version of events, the betrayal is essentially an inside job. Jesus asks Judas to hand him over to the authorities so that his physical body can be sacrificed, which allows his divine spirit to ascend. This completely transforms Judas from a greedy monster into a deeply tragic figure, someone willingly taking on eternal condemnation just to execute a necessary divine mission.
Finally, Section 5. Reassessing the traitor. Let's look at some modern reinterpretations.
In the modern era, armed with a much more critical approach to historical texts and a genuine desire to heal past prejudices, scholars and artists have really begun to peel back the layers of hatred. Look at the drastic shifts in these modern interpretations. In the 19th century, the writer Thomas de Quincey argued Judas was actually a political revolutionary. He turned Jesus in simply to force an armed uprising against Rome. Fast forward to 1953, and the famous novel The Last Temptation of Christ portrayed Judas as Jesus' strongest, most loyal collaborator. Andrew Lloyd Webber's 1973 musical Jesus Christ Superstar depicted him as a highly rational man, just terrified that Jesus' growing popularity would bring the crushing weight of the Roman army down on the Jewish people. And beautifully, by the year 2000, even the famous Oberammergau Passion Play in Germany, which historically had pushed some very dark anti-Jewish themes, revised its script to explicitly hold out hope for Judas's forgiveness.
So, after unearthing the contradictions in the early texts and peeling back centuries of heavy, sometimes dangerous myth-making in this explainer, we finally arrive at the core of the issue. The actual historical record of this man is remarkably thin, yet the theological shadow he casts is massive. We are left with this haunting question. Was Judas Iscariot an agent of Satan, driven purely by greed? Was he an instrument of God, executing a necessary cosmic plan? Or was he simply a misunderstood revolutionary caught up in the gears of the Roman Empire? Think about what his evolving myth tells us about our own human need for scapegoats. It really makes you wonder about the profound power of a story to shape human history, doesn't it?